I came home early and found my husband in the bathtub with my sister, so I locked the door from the outside, and then I called my brother-in-law and told him, "You better get over here right now." 15 minutes later, he showed up, but he did not come alone. My name is Audrey, and at 34 years old, I never expected to be standing on the wrong side of a locked door in my own house, listening to my life fall apart. I have always been the responsible one, the planner, the fixer, while my younger sister Brittany was the golden child who could do no wrong. I built a career as a creative director and bought this beautiful home in Seattle, while Brittany drifted through life relying on her charm and our parents' money. Today, that dynamic was about to change forever. It was 2:14 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I was supposed to be on a flight to Chicago for a client pitch, but a mechanical failure grounded the plane. I decided to come home and surprise my husband Grant. I did not text him. I just wanted to curl up on the couch with him and forget about work. When I walked into the foyer, the house was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that feels heavy. I kicked off my heels on the marble floor, and that is when I heard it. The faint rhythmic sound of water splashing and the hum of the jacuzzi jets coming from the master suite upstairs. I frowned because Grant told me he had back-to-back meetings all day. I walked up the floating staircase, my stocking feet making no sound. As I got closer to the bedroom, the sounds became distinct. There was laughter, a high-pitched giggling that I had known my entire life. It was Brittany. My stomach dropped, but my mind refused to believe it. Maybe she was just visiting. Maybe she was downstairs and the sound was carrying. But as I reached the open door of the master bedroom, the trail of clothes told a different story. My husband's tie was draped over the armchair. My sister's bright red dress was in a heap on the floor. The bathroom door was cracked open just an inch, letting steam escape. I crept closer, holding my breath. I peered through the gap. The sight burned itself into my retinas instantly. Grant was in the tub and Brittany was sitting across from him. They were drinking my expensive champagne. Grant was laughing at something she said and tracing his finger along her arm. The intimacy was undeniable. They looked comfortable, like this was a routine, not a mistake. In that moment, I could have screamed. I could have kicked the door open and thrown a vase, but a cold calm washed over me. I am a businesswoman. I do not react emotionally, I strategize. I slowly pulled the heavy oak door closed. It made a soft click. They did not hear it over the noise of the jets. I reached into my purse and pulled out my keyring. Grant always teased me for carrying the master skeleton key that could lock every interior door in the house. He called it my control freak habit. Today, it was my weapon. I inserted the old-fashioned brass key into the deadbolt on the outside of the bathroom door. I turned it once. Click. I turned it twice. Click. The lock was solid. They were trapped inside my bathroom, naked and oblivious. Before I continue this story, please hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I leaned my back against the door, listening to the water churn. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. I did not call the police yet. I called Damon, my brother-in-law, Brittany's husband. He answered on the second ring. "Damon," I said, keeping my voice terrifyingly calm. "You need to come to my house right now." "Why?" he asked, sensing the ice in my tone. "Because I have a package here that belongs to you," I whispered. "And bring the red envelope." He did not ask questions. He just hung up. I looked at my watch. The show was about to begin. The silence inside the bathroom lasted exactly 3 seconds before the handle rattled violently. It was the frantic, desperate sound of metal grinding against a solid brass deadbolt. Grant shouted my name. His voice was muffled by the thick oak, but the panic in it was crystal clear. "Audrey, open this door right now. This is not funny." The water splashing stopped abruptly, replaced by the wet slap of bare feet on tile. I did not answer. I simply leaned my full weight against the doorframe, crossing my arms over my chest. I could feel the vibrations against my spine as he pounded his fist on the wood. It was a rhythmic thud, thud, thud that matched the beating of my own heart, not out of fear, but out of a strange, cold adrenaline. Brittany's voice joined in shrill and demanding. Let me out, you psycho! My clothes are out there. You cannot keep us in here. I closed my eyes and let a small, humorless smile touch my lips. Just 24 hours ago, Grant had kissed my forehead at the door, his suitcase packed with heavy coats. He looked me in the eye and said, "Chicago is freezing this time of year. I will miss you, honey." At the exact same time, Brittany had sent a photo to our family group chat of a cucumber water glass captioned, "Spa Day, Self-Care Needed." Lies. Just layers upon layers of cheap, predictable lies. They thought they were so clever coordinating their stories, thinking I was too busy closing deals to notice the inconsistencies. But they forgot that my job involves noticing the details everyone else misses. The pounding intensified. I pulled my phone from my blazer pocket. My fingers hovered over the screen. The background was still a photo of Grant and me from our anniversary in Napa. I swiped it away without hesitation. I opened my messages with Damon. We had not spoken much lately aside from polite nods at family gatherings, but I knew he was the only other person in this family who valued loyalty over appearances. I typed quickly, "Come to my house immediately. Do not ask questions." Then I added a second line, "Bring the red package." I hit send. I watched the delivered status turn to read almost instantly. Damon was an architect. He was precise, punctual, and he knew exactly what the red package contained. It was a fail-safe we had discussed once jokingly over scotch at Christmas 2 years ago. We never thought we would actually need to use it. Inside the bathroom, the aggression shifted to bargaining. Grant's voice dropped an octave, trying to sound reasonable. "Baby, come on. It is not what it looks like. We were just talking." I slipped in the tub by accident and Brittany was helping me up. "Please, just unlock the door and we can explain everything." Explain! That was rich. I took a step away from the door, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor, purposefully loud, so they would know I was still there listening. I walked over to the nightstand where Grant kept his expensive watch collection. I picked up his favorite Rolex, the one I bought him when he got his honorary promotion. I turned it over in my hands, feeling the weight of the gold. "You have 15 minutes, Grant," I said, loud enough for them to hear, but keeping my voice steady. "Use them to come up with a better lie than slipping in the tub. And Brittany, I hope you enjoy the steam. It is good for the pores." I walked out of the bedroom and stood at the top of the stairs looking down at the foyer. My house had never looked more beautiful. The afternoon light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It was peaceful out here. But behind that locked door, I had just started a war. And unlike them, I had brought ammunition. Grant's tactics shifted with terrifying speed. The aggressive pounding stopped and was replaced by a soft knuckles rap against the wood. When he spoke again, his voice was dripping with that condescending calmness he used whenever I questioned his spending habits. "Audrey, baby, please listen to reason," he said. "You are blowing this out of proportion." Brittany felt faint. She has had those dizzy spells lately, remember? She almost collapsed on the tile. I was just helping her get into the water to cool down. I did not want her to crack her head open. It was a lie so lazy it was almost insulting. He was trying to gaslight me through 3 inches of solid oak. He actually expected me to believe that the remedy for a fainting spell was stripping naked and drinking vintage champagne. He was banking on my history of being the fixer, the one who smoothed things over to avoid a scene. But the Audrey who fixed things had died the moment I saw his hand on her arm. Brittany, however, had no patience for the long con. She was done pretending. Her voice cut through Grant's soothing tone like a serrated knife. "Oh, stop it, Grant," she snapped. "Stop trying to protect her feelings. She does not have any." I could hear her moving closer to the door. I imagined her pressing her face against the wood, her wet hair dripping on my floor. "You want to know the truth, Audrey," she yelled. "Here it is. You are an ice queen. You treat this marriage like a merger and acquisition. You are never home. You are always flying off to some client dinner while Grant sits here alone. He needed a real woman. Someone who knows how to prioritize a husband over a quarterly report. You drove him to this. This is your fault." Her words were designed to shatter me. She targeted my deepest insecurity that my ambition somehow made me unlovable. But instead of tears, I felt a surge of cold power. She was admitting it. She was justifying betraying her own sister because she wanted what was mine. She was not a victim of circumstance. She was a predator. I did not scream back. I did not justify my career that paid for the roof over their heads and the very water they were soaking in. Arguing would only give them the satisfaction of knowing they hurt me. Instead, I walked over to the smart home control panel mounted on the wall near the staircase. It was a state-of-the-art system that linked every room in the house. I tapped the screen. I selected the input source as master bedroom intercom. Then I selected the output zone as whole house. I turned the volume dial all the way to maximum. Suddenly, the speakers in the foyer, the kitchen, the living room, and even the basement media room crackled to life. Brittany's voice was no longer muffled behind a door. It was booming from the ceiling like a deity of betrayal. "You are pathetic, Audrey!" Her amplified voice thundered through the house, shaking the crystal chandelier in the hallway. "Grant has been miserable for years. He told me he only stayed because of the money." I stood there in the hallway listening to her destroy her own reputation. Every word was being broadcasted to the main floor where the cleaning staff would be starting their shift in 10 minutes. I wanted every corner of this estate to absorb their toxicity so that when I kicked them out, the house would finally be clean. "Keep talking, Brittany," I whispered to myself. "Dig that hole a little deeper." I walked down the floating staircase, leaving the chaos upstairs behind me. Brittany's voice was still echoing through the speakers, ranting about how I was a terrible sister and a worse wife, but down here in the expansive kitchen, it was just background noise. It sounded like a desperate podcast I had no interest in subscribing to. I reached for the bottle of Cabernet sitting on the granite island. It was a vintage Grant had bought for our 5-year anniversary. He had made a toast that night, about our future, about building a legacy together. I popped the cork with a satisfying pop and poured a generous glass. I held it up to the light, watching the deep red liquid swirl. I figured the destruction of a marriage was a special enough occasion to open the good wine. As I took the first sip, the adrenaline began to settle and clarity took its place. The truth was, I had not been blind. I had been waiting. 6 months ago, I noticed the first discrepancy in our joint account. It was small, just a dinner for two at a steakhouse on a Tuesday when Grant said he was working late. Then came the cash withdrawals, $500 here, $1,000 there. He labeled them as client entertainment in our budget app. But I knew Grant's clients. They were health nuts who drank green juice, not scotch, and they certainly did not shop at the lingerie boutique where a $2,000 charge appeared last November. I remembered asking him about it. He looked me dead in the eye and said he bought a gift for his mother's birthday. I called his mother later that week to wish her a happy birthday. She told me Grant had sent her a card, just a card. That was the moment the love died. That was the moment I stopped being a wife and started being a forensic accountant. I did not confront him then because I did not have the smoking gun. I needed irrefutable proof. I needed to catch them in a way that left no room for gaslighting, no room for excuses, and absolutely no room for them to claim half of my assets in a divorce settlement. I swirled the wine in the glass again. Today I got my proof. It was uglier than I imagined. I thought it might be a secretary or an old college flame. I never let myself believe it would be Brittany, my own flesh and blood, the sister whose tuition I paid, the sister whose hand I held when she got her tonsils out. The betrayal did not break my heart, it hardened it. It turned my sadness into a cold, heavy stone in the pit of my stomach. Suddenly, the sharp chime of the doorbell cut through the house, silencing the screaming from the speakers for a brief second. I set my wine glass down on a coaster. I checked my reflection in the dark window. My lipstick was still perfect. My blazer was unwrinkled. I did not look like a victim. I looked like the CEO of my own life. I walked to the front door. I could see the silhouette of a tall, broad-shouldered man through the frosted glass. Beside him were two uniformed shapes. My reinforcements had arrived. I unlocked the door and pulled it open. Damon stood there looking impeccable in his charcoal suit, but his eyes were dark with a fury he was barely containing. I stepped aside and gestured for them to enter. "Welcome to the party," I said dryly. "The entertainment is upstairs and they are dying to see you." Damon did not smile. He just nodded to the officers and stepped across the threshold, carrying a thick red envelope that held the power to end Grant's life as he knew it. Damon did not say a word as he stepped into the foyer. He did not need to. His presence alone commanded the space in a way Grant never could. Flanking him were two uniformed police officers looking stern and official, and Ms. Parker, my family's estate attorney who had served my grandmother for 30 years. She adjusted her glasses and gave me a curt nod of acknowledgement. "Audrey, Ms. Parker," said her voice crisp and professional. "We have the documents you requested, the deed, the trust agreement, and the restraining order application." I gestured toward the stairs where Brittany's voice was still screeching from the speakers, though it had grown hoarse and repetitive. "They are upstairs," I said. "Master Suite." One of the officers, a tall man with a buzz cut, looked at Damon. "Sir, are you the property owner?" Damon shook his head and pointed at me. "No, officer. My sister-in-law is the sole owner. I am just the witness, but I do have authorization to act on her behalf regarding security matters." He pulled a folded document from his inside jacket pocket and handed it to the officer. It was a notarized copy of the property deed clearly stating the ownership under the A&D Trust. The officer scanned the paper quickly, then looked up at me. "Ma'am, do you want these individuals removed from your property?" I looked him in the eye. "I want them removed, prosecuted for trespassing, and I want a full report filed. They have refused to leave after being asked multiple times." "Understood," the officer said. He signaled to his partner. "Let's go." We moved as a unit up the floating staircase. The sound of our footsteps was a heavy, rhythmic march of judgment. As we reached the landing, Brittany's voice cut out abruptly. She must have heard the heavy boots on the hardwood. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than her screaming. Damon walked beside me, his expression unreadable. I knew what this moment cost him. He loved Brittany once. He had built her a studio. He had tolerated her tantrums. But betrayal has a way of erasing history. Today he was not a husband coming to save his wife. He was an architect coming to inspect a demolition. We stopped outside the master bedroom door. The silence inside was suffocating. They knew someone was out here, but they did not know who. They probably expected Grant's mother, or maybe just me coming back to surrender. "Open it," Damon said softly. I reached for the key still in the lock. My hand did not tremble. I turned the deadbolt back. Click, click. I pushed the door open. The steam had dissipated, leaving the room damp and smelling of my expensive bath salts. Grant and Brittany stood in the center of the room, shivering. They were dripping wet, clutching my white Egyptian cotton towels around their bodies like pathetic togas. Their eyes went wide when they saw the wall of people standing in the hallway. Grant's face turned a ghostly shade of pale when he saw the uniforms. Brittany just stared at Damon, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Honey," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What are you doing here?" Damon did not answer. He just stepped aside to let the police officers enter the room. The flash of a camera went off blindingly bright. Ms. Parker was already at work documenting the scene for the courtroom. The heavy oak door swung inward, revealing the humid sanctuary that had become a crime scene of betrayal. The steam that billowed out smelled of lavender and eucalyptus, a scent I had associated with relaxation, but would now forever associate with deceit. The scene before us was pathetic in its clarity. Grant and Brittany were scrambling out of the porcelain tub, clutching my white Egyptian cotton towels against their wet skin like shields. The water was still churning in the jacuzzi, creating a surreal soundtrack to their humiliation. Ms. Parker stepped forward before anyone could speak. She was a woman of 60 with a spine of steel, and she raised her digital camera with the precision of a sniper. Click, click, click. The flash was blinding in the dim mood lighting of the bathroom, illuminating every detail of their infidelity. The expensive champagne bottle sitting on the edge of the tub, the two half-empty glasses, the way Brittany's wet hair was plastered to her face, and the terrified look in Grant's eyes as he realized his life was unraveling frame by frame. "Stop it!" Grant screamed, holding up a hand to block the lens. "You cannot do this! This is illegal! Get that camera out of my face!" Ms. Parker lowered the camera slightly, but did not stop recording. "Actually, Grant, it is perfectly legal," she said calmly. "This is a residence owned by my client. You are currently engaging in adulterous behavior, which violates the morality clause in your prenuptial agreement. These images are simply necessary documentation for the imminent divorce proceedings." Smile. Brittany looked past the lawyer and locked eyes with Damon. I expected her to cry or beg for forgiveness. I expected her to run to him, but she just froze. She saw the two police officers standing behind him, their hands resting near their belts, and she realized the gravity of the situation. "Damon," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the jets. "Damon, please let me explain." Damon did not step into the room. He stood in the doorway like a statue towering over the scene. He looked at his wife of 3 years, standing naked next to her sister's husband, and his expression remained terrifyingly blank. There was no rage, there was no heartbreak. It was the look of a man who had already grieved the death of his marriage long before he walked into this room. "Save your breath," Brittany Damon said. His voice was deep and steady, devoid of any warmth. "I saw the text messages. I saw the hotel receipts from last month. I just needed to see this to make sure I was not crazy." He looked at Grant with pure disgust. "You two deserve each other." The shame in the room was palpable. Grant tried to muster some authority, puffing out his chest despite being wrapped in a towel. "You brought the cops," he spat, looking at me. "You really are a cold-hearted witch, Audrey. We were just comforting each other because you are so emotionally unavailable." I laughed. It was a dry, sharp sound that cut through the humidity. "Comforting each other," I repeated. "Is that what you call it?" I turned to the officers. "Officers, I would like these two individuals removed from my property immediately. They do not live here, and their presence is causing me significant distress." Grant's jaw dropped. "You cannot kick me out. I live here. This is my house too." I shook my head slowly, savoring the moment. "No, Grant. You just sleep here. And as of this moment, your lease has expired." The transformation from cowering adulterer to self-righteous victim took Grant exactly 30 seconds. He scrambled into his trousers, hopping on one foot while still shouting orders. He did not even button his shirt properly before he turned his aggression toward the officers. "Officer, I demand you arrest this woman immediately," he bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She locked us in here against our will. That is false imprisonment. That is kidnapping." I know my rights. It was a bold strategy. He was trying to pivot the narrative from his infidelity to my reaction. He wanted to make the lock on the door the crime rather than the betrayal that happened behind it. He looked at the police with wide, pleading eyes, channeling every ounce of his charm that had once fooled me. "You have to understand, my wife is not well. She has been under a lot of stress at work. She is delusional. She sees things that are not there." I stood next to Ms. Parker and watched him perform. It was fascinating in a grotesque sort of way. He was building a reality where he was the innocent husband tending to a sick sister-in-law, and I was the deranged, jealous wife who hallucinated an affair. Grant continued his tirade, stepping closer to the taller officer. "She has been paranoid for months. She accuses me of sleeping with everyone. The barista, the neighbor, now her own sister. It is sick. We were just in here because Brittany felt faint and needed water. Audrey locked the door and refused to let us out. We were terrified. She is dangerous. You need to take her into custody for a psychiatric evaluation." Brittany caught on quickly. She wrapped a silk robe around herself and let out a sob that sounded practiced. "He is right," she sniffled, wiping away a fake tear. "Audrey has always been jealous of me. She has always wanted what I have. She locked us in here to humiliate us. I was scared for my life, officer. I thought she was going to burn the house down." The officer looked from Grant to Brittany and then back to me. His expression did not change. He had likely seen hundreds of domestic disputes, and he knew the smell of a lie. He looked at the deadbolt on the door and then down at his notepad. "Sir, let me get this straight. You are claiming your wife imprisoned you, But you are currently standing in a master bathroom with a jacuzzi tub, half-empty champagne glasses, and your clothes scattered on the floor. And you want me to arrest the homeowner for locking a door in her own house. Grant sputtered, his face turning red. It does not matter what it looks like. The law is the law. She restricted my movement. I finally spoke, my voice cutting through his hysteria like a razor. Grant, you are free to move now. In fact, I am encouraging you to move. Right out the front door. Grant sneered at me, dropping the victim act for a split second. I am not going anywhere, Audrey. This is my house. You cannot kick me out just because you are having a psychotic break. Officer, tell her she cannot kick me out of my marital home. He crossed his arms triumphantly, convinced that the law protected his residency. He thought that because he received his mail here and slept in my bed, he had squatter's rights. He was about to learn a very painful lesson about the difference between a husband and a tenant. Brittany watched her husband step fully into the bathroom, and her expression shifted from fear to a strange sort of anticipation. She knew Damon was a passionate man. In her twisted mind, she probably expected him to lunge at Grant, to throw a punch, to scream until his voice gave out. She expected a crime of passion because in her world, jealousy was the ultimate form of flattery. She tightened the towel around her chest and took a step toward him, her eyes welling up with fresh tears, preparing to play the part of the confused wife who made a terrible mistake. Damon, honey, please say something, she whimpered, reaching a trembling hand out toward him. I was so lonely. Grant was just listening to me. We did not mean for it to happen. Damon did not flinch. He did not look at her hand. He did not look at Grant, who was still puffing his chest out by the sink. Damon simply reached into the inside pocket of his suit jacket. The movement was slow and deliberate. Brittany flinched, expecting a weapon. In a way it was. He pulled out a thick manila envelope. It was not the red envelope I had asked for, that one was for later. This was something personal. He extended his arm and held it out to her. His hand was steady, rock steady. What is this? Brittany asked, her voice barely a whisper. Take it, Damon said. His tone was not angry. It was exhausted. She reached out and took the envelope. Her wet fingers left marks on the paper. She opened the flap and pulled out the document inside. The bold black letters at the top were visible even from where I stood. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Brittany gasped and dropped the papers on the wet tile. You are divorcing me, she shrieked, looking up at him with disbelief. Over one mistake. Damon, we can go to counseling. We can fix this. You cannot just throw away 3 years of marriage because of one misunderstanding. Damon let out a short, bitter laugh. One mistake, he repeated, shaking his head. Brittany, do not insult my intelligence. Do not stand there wrapped in your sister's towel and lie to my face one last time. He took a step closer, towering over her. I installed a GPS tracker on your Range Rover 6 weeks ago. I did it after you came home smelling like Grant's cologne and told me you had been at yoga. Brittany's face went white. Grant stopped his posturing and slumped against the counter, realizing the depth of the hole they were in. I know about the Motel 6 off the interstate. Damon continued, ticking the locations off on his fingers. I know about the lunch dates at that French bistro on 4th Avenue, where you held hands across the table. I know about the 3 times you parked in this driveway when Audrey was out of town. I have the logs, Brittany. I have the timestamps. I have the mileage. He looked at her with a profound sense of pity. I did not come here today to fight for you. I came here to serve you. You are free now. You can have him. Brittany looked at Grant, then back at Damon, realizing that her safety net was gone. She had not just lost a husband, she had lost her lifestyle, her stability, and her reputation. Damon turned his back on her. He looked at me, and for the first time since he arrived, his eyes softened. I am sorry you had to see this, Audrey, he said. I am not, I replied. I prefer the truth, however ugly it is. Grant tried to speak up again, sensing the power dynamic shifting. You cannot track people without their consent, that is stalking. Damon glanced over his shoulder. Actually, Grant, the car is in my name. I can track my own property wherever I want. Just like Audrey can evict whoever she wants. He walked out of the bathroom, leaving the divorce papers soaking up the water on the floor, a fitting end to a marriage built on lies. The silence he left behind was heavier than any scream could have been. Grant's face turned a shade of crimson that clashed violently with the white towel wrapped around his waist. He looked at Damon's retreating back, and then spun around to face me, his eyes bulging with a mix of rage and panic. He realized he was losing control of the narrative, and his instinct was to get louder to assert dominance through sheer volume. "This is insane," he screamed, his voice cracking. "You cannot just kick me out. This is my house. My name is on the mailbox outside. My name is on the electric bill. I have lived here for 5 years, Audrey. That establishes residency. That establishes ownership. You cannot just evict a husband from his own home like he is some kind of squatter." He marched over to the vanity counter where a stack of mail was sitting. He grabbed a utility envelope and shoved it toward the police officer's face. "Look at this. Grant Harrison. That is me. This proves this is my legal residence. Tell her she cannot make me leave. Tell her that if she wants me out, she has to go through a court eviction process that takes months." The police officer looked at the crumpled envelope and then at Ms. Parker. He looked bored. He had clearly seen this desperation before. He gestured to the lawyer. "Ma'am, do you have the documentation you mentioned earlier?" Ms. Parker stepped forward. Her movements were calm and precise, contrasting sharply with Grant's frantic energy. She opened her leather portfolio and pulled out a document with a blue cover and a gold seal. She did not hand it to Grant. She handed it to the officer. "Officer," she said, her voice smooth as silk, "what Mr. Harrison is holding is a bill for electricity usage. What I am handing you is the warranty deed and the declaration of trust for this property." Grant froze. "Trust?" he stammered. "What trust?" Ms. Parker turned to him and adjusted her glasses. "The A&D Family Trust, Grant. Established by Audrey's grandmother 20 years ago. The property we are standing in was purchased by that trust long before you met Audrey. The trust is the sole legal owner of this estate. Audrey is the sole beneficiary. You are not listed on the deed. You are not listed as a trustee. You are not even listed as a tenant." She paused to let the words sink in. "Legally speaking, Mr. Harrison, you are a guest who has been allowed to stay here at the pleasure of the beneficiary. And as of 10 minutes ago, that pleasure has been revoked." I watched the realization hit him. It was like watching a building collapse in slow motion. He looked at me, his mouth gaping open. "You never told me the house was in a trust." I took a sip of my wine, which I had carried up from the kitchen. "I did not have to tell you, Grant," I said calmly. "You never asked. You were so happy living in luxury driving cars you did not pay for, and sleeping in a house you did not buy, that you never bothered to ask whose name was actually on the paper. You just assumed that because you married me, you owned me and everything I have." Ms. Parker continued twisting the knife with legal precision. "Since there is no lease agreement and you have made no mortgage payments, you have no claim to tenancy rights. The homeowner has revoked your permission to be on the premises. Therefore, your continued presence here constitutes criminal trespass." The officer looked up from the document. "The paperwork looks solid, ma'am." He turned to Grant and pointed to the door. "Sir, you have 5 minutes to get dressed and vacate the premises. If you are still here in 6 minutes, you will be arrested for trespassing. And sir, if you damage anything on your way out, we will add vandalism to the charges." Grant looked around the room looking for an ally, looking for a loophole, but there was none. The walls he thought he owned were closing in on him. The bathroom he had defiled with my sister was now his prison cell, and the only way out was a walk of shame past the neighbors. The officer's voice was the final gavel striking down Grant's delusion. He stepped forward, his hand resting casually but firmly on his belt. "Mr. Harrison, you have heard the lady. You are trespassing on private property owned by the A&D Trust. You have exactly 3 minutes to vacate the premises before I place you under arrest." Grant looked around the bathroom frantically. His eyes darted from the officer to me, and finally to the walk-in closet where his bespoke Italian suits were hanging. "Fine," he spat, trying to salvage a shred of dignity. "I will leave, but I am taking my things. I am not leaving without my clothes, my watches, and my laptop. He pushed past the officer and made a dash for the closet. Brittany followed him, snatching up her designer handbag from the vanity. Not so fast, Ms. Parker said, her voice stopping them in their tracks. She signaled to the second officer, who stepped in front of the closet door, blocking Grant's path. Grant stopped short, his chest heaving. What now? He screamed. Those are my things. I bought them. Actually, Ms. Parker said, consulting her clipboard, you purchased them using a joint credit card linked to Audrey's primary account. In the state of Washington, assets acquired during marriage are considered community property until divided by a court. However, since we have evidence of significant dissipation of marital assets for illicit purposes, we have filed an emergency motion to freeze all movable assets. She looked over her glasses at him. That means nothing leaves this house. No suits, no electronics, no jewelry. And certainly not that Rolex on the nightstand, which was a gift from Audrey, and is therefore subject to revocation under the infidelity clause. Grant looked like he was about to have a stroke. You cannot be serious. You expect me to walk out of here in a towel. I stepped forward. No, Grant, I am not heartless. You can take the clothes you were wearing when you arrived. I pointed to the pile of clothes on the floor. And you can take your toiletries. Anything else with a value of over $500 stays here until a judge decides otherwise. Brittany shrieked, clutching her Hermes bag to her chest. This bag cost $12,000. You cannot keep it. It is mine. The officer reached out and gently but firmly removed the bag from her grip. Then it stays here, ma'am. If you try to remove it, we will charge you with theft of marital assets. The realization of what was happening finally broke them. They were being stripped of their armor. Without the expensive suits, without the luxury accessories, without the status symbols, they were just two cheaters caught in a lie. Grant dressed hurriedly in his wrinkled trousers and shirt, his hands shaking so badly he could barely button his cuffs. He tried to slide his laptop into his jacket, but the officer saw him. Leave it, the officer barked. Grant slammed the laptop down on the counter. This is theft, Audrey. I have important work files on there. I smiled. I know. And since you did that work while employed by my company on a laptop purchased by my company, that data belongs to me too. Packed into a corner with no legal leg to stand on, Grant and Brittany were forced to retreat. They looked small. They looked cheap. For years they had defined themselves by the things I bought them. Now, stripped of those things, they were nothing. Let's go, the officer said, steering them toward the door. I watched them walk out of the master bedroom. Brittany was barefoot, carrying her heels, because she could not walk in them without her confidence. Grant looked like a deflated balloon. They left behind the life they thought they deserved and walked toward the reality they had actually earned. The descent down the floating staircase was a pathetic reverse of the grand entrance they usually made. Typically, Grant walked down these stairs adjusting his cufflinks like he owned the world, while Brittany would glide down in her designer heels waiting for compliments. Today they were being marched down like common criminals, flanked by uniformed officers. Their heads hung low to avoid eye contact with the cleaning staff, who had gathered in the hallway to watch. The heavy front door swung open, and the bright afternoon sun of Seattle hit them like a spotlight. In a neighborhood like Highlands, privacy is an illusion that we pay millions for, but never actually receive. The flashing blue lights of the two patrol cars parked in my circular driveway had done their job. The audience had assembled. Mrs. Higgins from next door was pretending to trim her hedges, but her shears were not moving. The breathless jogger from down the street had stopped to tie his shoe for the third time. Even the delivery driver for Amazon had paused his scanner to watch the spectacle. They all saw it. Grant Harrison, the man who bragged about his golf handicap and his stock portfolio, was being escorted out of his mansion by the police wearing wrinkled clothes and looking like he had not slept in a week. Beside him, Brittany clutched her chest, trying to hide her face with her hair barefoot on the asphalt because she had been forbidden from taking the shoes that were technically marital assets. I walked calmly through the master bedroom out onto the private balcony that overlooked the driveway. The cool breeze felt cleansing against my skin. I leaned against the wrought iron railing, the cold metal grounding me. From up here, they looked like ants. Small, insignificant ants who had bitten the wrong person. Grant looked up and saw me. For a moment, I saw the flash of hatred in his eyes, but it was quickly extinguished by the realization of his reality. He shouted something, but the wind carried it away. He looked at his car, a sleek Porsche parked near the fountain, and reached into his pocket. His face fell. The keys were in the bowl on the foyer table inside. He was stranded. Brittany was sobbing openly now. She realized there was no Uber coming to save her. She turned to Damon, who had walked out behind the officers. She reached for his arm, but he sidestepped her with a grace that was almost balletic. He walked past her to his own truck, got in, and started the engine. He did not look back. I raised my wine glass in a silent toast. It was not a toast to their health or happiness. It was a toast to the silence they were leaving behind. The police officer pointed down the long driveway, indicating that they needed to keep moving off the property line. As they began the long, humiliating walk down the hill toward the main gate, dragging their feet on the pavement, I took the final sip of my wine. It tasted like justice. Rich, complex, and leaving a warm feeling in my chest. The trash had finally taken itself out. I walked back inside from the balcony, and the house felt different. It was lighter, as if the very air had been purified by their departure. But I knew the silence was only temporary. The mechanism of my family's dysfunction was predictable, like a clockwork machine. When the golden child falls, the enabler is summoned to cushion the landing. I poured myself a glass of sparkling water this time, needing a clear head for round 2. My phone began to vibrate on the marble countertop. I did not need to look at the screen to know who it was, but I looked anyway. The screen lit up with the word, Mother. Not Mom, not Mommy, just Mother. A title she demanded but rarely earned. I let it ring 3 times. I took a sip of water. I adjusted my silk cuff. Then I slid my thumb across the screen and put it on speaker. Audrey Elizabeth. The voice on the other end shrieked before I could even say hello. Have you lost your mind? I just got off the phone with your sister. She is hysterical. She is standing on the side of the road barefoot. How could you be so cruel? I leaned against the counter, listening to the familiar cadence of her rage. It was always like this. In Patricia's world, Brittany's actions were never the problem, only my reactions to them. She slept with my husband, Mother, I said, keeping my voice flat. In my house. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Patricia snapped. It was a mistake. People make mistakes, Audrey. But you do not throw family out on the street like garbage. You do not humiliate your sister and your husband in front of the entire neighborhood. Do you have any idea what Mrs. Higgins is going to say at the club tomorrow? You have ruined our reputation. There it was, the core of the issue. It was not about my heartbreak or the betrayal of her son-in-law. It was about her reputation at the country club. It was about how this reflected on her. They ruined their own reputation, I replied. I just expedited the process, and they are not on the street. They are walking toward the gate. I am sure Grant can call one of his drinking buddies to pick them up, since you raised a daughter who does not know how to call an Uber. Audrey, you listen to me right now, Patricia shouted, her voice trembling with indignation. You will let them back in. You will apologize. And you will sit down and discuss this like adults. Marriage is about compromise. You cannot just throw Grant away because he stumbled. He did not stumble, Mother, I said, cutting her off. He fell into a jacuzzi with his sister-in-law. And I am not compromising on my dignity. You are a cold, vindictive girl, Patricia spat. You always have been. You think just because you have money, you can control everyone. Well, you are going to fix this. Do you hear me? Fix this right now, or... I did not wait for the threat. I knew what was coming. Threats of disowning me. Threats of cutting me off from family holidays. Empty threats from a woman who had no leverage left. I am done fixing things, Mother, I said. Go pick them up if you are so worried. I tapped the red icon ending the call. The silence returned instantly, but I knew she would call back. She would call and call until I submitted, because that is how she operated. She wore people down. I looked at her name on my screen. I tapped the small information icon next to it. I scrolled down to the bottom of the list. My finger hovered over the option written in red text. Block this caller. I pressed it. A pop-up asked me to confirm. I tapped yes. For the first time in 34 years, I had silenced the voice that told me I was wrong for demanding respect. It felt terrified. It felt exhilarating. I set the phone down. The queen had been blocked, but I knew the king and queen were already on their way to storm the castle in person. I had about 20 minutes to prepare the drawbridge. 30 minutes. That was exactly how long it took for the cavalry of dysfunction to arrive. I was sitting in the living room allowing the silence to settle around me when the front door shook. It was not a polite knock. It was a heavy, demanding pounding that threatened to crack the frosted glass. I did not need to check the security camera to know who it was. I knew that rhythm. It was the sound of my mother Patricia demanding an audience. I walked to the door, my movements slow and deliberate. I was not afraid. I was just exhausted by the predictability of it all. I unlocked the door, and before I could even step back, they pushed their way inside. My father came first, looking red-faced and uncomfortable, followed closely by my mother, who looked like she was ready to burn the house down. She did not look at my face to see if I had been crying. She did not ask how I was holding up after finding my husband in bed with her other daughter. She did not offer a hug or a single word of comfort. Instead, she threw her designer purse onto the entryway table, my table, and turned on me with eyes full of accusation. "I hope you are proud of yourself," she hissed, her voice vibrating with misplaced anger. "I just passed your sister on the highway. She is walking Audrey, walking like a vagrant on the side of the road." People were staring. "Do you have any idea how humiliating that is for us? Do you know who I am in this town?" I stared at her, marveling at her priorities. "She slept with my husband, mother," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "In my bathtub, in the home that I pay for." Patricia waved her hand dismissively, as if I had complained about Grant leaving the toilet seat up. "Oh, stop being so dramatic," she scoffed. "Men make mistakes, Audrey. It is in their nature to stray sometimes. Grant is a young, successful man with needs. If you were home more often, instead of chasing your little career, maybe he would not have looked elsewhere. You drove him to it with your coldness. You cannot expect a man to wait around while you play boss." The words hit me like a physical slap, but I did not flinch. She was actually blaming me. She was standing in my foyer, rewriting reality to make the victim the villain. And to drag Brittany into this, she continued, her voice rising to a shriek. "She is your little sister, your flesh and blood. You are supposed to protect her, not destroy her life over a moment of weakness. She is young. She did not know what she was doing. You are the older one. You are supposed to be the mature one. You should have been the bigger person and handled this quietly." My father nodded in agreement, finally chiming in from the corner. "Your mother is right, Audrey. You went too far calling the police. We settle things inside the family. We do not air our dirty laundry for the neighbors to see. You have embarrassed us all today." I looked at them standing in the foyer of the house I bought, defending the people who betrayed me. The realization washed over me, cold and final. They did not love me. They tolerated me as long as I was useful, as long as I kept the peace. But the moment I inconvenienced their golden child, I became the enemy. "I am not the bigger person anymore," I said, stepping back to create distance between us. "I am the person who signs the checks. And right now, I am the person who is done listening to you justify their cruelty." I looked at my parents standing in my foyer, the air thick with their misplaced judgment, and I decided to detonate the nuclear option. If my words would not convince them, maybe high-definition evidence would. I pulled my phone from my pocket and tapped the screen connecting to the living room display. I did not play the video of them naked, as that would be undignified. Instead, I played the audio recording of their conversation from the moment I locked the bathroom door. Grant's voice filled the high ceilings of the entryway, amplified and clear. "She is an ice queen," he sneered on the recording. "You are the only one who understands me, baby." Then came Brittany's giggle, distinct and cruel. She does not deserve you, Grant. She treats you like an employee. I watched my mother's face, waiting for the shame. I was waiting for the horror of realizing her youngest daughter was sleeping with her eldest daughter's husband. I expected her to cover her mouth, to gasp, to look at me with an apology in her eyes. But the shame never came. Patricia rolled her eyes. She actually rolled her eyes at the sound of her son-in-law betraying her daughter. "Turn that off," she snapped, waving her manicured hand as if shooing away a fly. "It is vulgar, Audrey. Recording people in private is a violation of trust. I cannot believe you would stoop so low." I paused, the recording, my hand shaking slightly, not from fear, but from pure disbelief. "Mom, did you hear what they said? He is admitting to sleeping with her. She is mocking me. This is not a misunderstanding. This is an affair." Patricia sighed, the long-suffering sigh of a martyr. "I heard a man who is lonely, Audrey. I heard a man who is crying out for affection because his wife is too busy climbing the corporate ladder to keep his bed warm. And I heard a sister who stepped in to comfort him when you were absent. If you had prioritized your marriage instead of your ego, maybe Grant would not have needed to look elsewhere. You drove him to this." The world stopped spinning for a second. There it was, the undeniable proof that I could never win. In the twisted cord of my family, I was guilty by default. If Grant cheated, it was because I worked too hard. If Brittany betrayed me, it was because I was not supportive enough. I was the scapegoat. I had always been the scapegoat. I was the one who fixed the problems and took the blame, while Brittany was the golden child who created the chaos and received the sympathy. I looked at my father, hoping for a sliver of rationality. "Dad," I said, my voice quiet, "you cannot agree with this. You cannot think this is my fault." He shifted his weight, looking down at the expensive Persian rug rather than meeting my eyes. He was a weak man, I realized. A man who had spent 40 years bowing to my mother's delusions to keep the peace. "Your mother has a point, Audrey," he mumbled. "You have been very distant lately. You cannot blame Grant for seeking connection. And Brittany is sensitive. You know she needs guidance, not judgment." I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was the snapping of the final tether. The invisible cord that had bound me to their approval for 34 years finally broke. I realized then that no amount of success, no amount of money, and no amount of truth would ever make them love me the way they loved her. They did not want a daughter. They wanted a doormat. And I was done lying down. I looked at the woman who gave birth to me and felt absolutely nothing. The anger had evaporated, leaving behind a clarity that was sharp and cold like a diamond. For years I had played by their rules. I had bought the gifts, hosted the holidays, and swallowed the insults, hoping that one day they would look at me with the same adoration they gave to Brittany. But standing there in my foyer, with the evidence of my husband's infidelity being dismissed as a mistake, I realized the game was rigged. I could never win because to them I was not a player, I was just the bank. I took a deep breath and squared my shoulders. "You are right, Mother," I said, my voice steady and loud enough to echo off the vaulted ceiling. "Brittany is your daughter, Grant is your son-in-law. They are family, and since you are so concerned about their well-being, I have a solution." Patricia looked at me, her eyes narrowing. "What are you talking about?" I walked to the front door and pulled it open wide, letting the cool evening air rush into the heated tension of the hallway. "I am saying that they are your problem now. If you think what they did is acceptable, then you can house them. You can feed them. You can pay for their clothes and their lifestyle. Because as of this moment, the Bank of Audrey is permanently closed." My father stepped forward, looking alarmed. "Now, Audrey, be reasonable. You cannot just cut everyone off. We are your parents." I looked him dead in the eye. "I am being reasonable, Dad. I am removing the toxic elements from my life. And right now that includes you. You stood there and watched Mom blame me for Grant cheating. You stood there and let her call me cruel for protecting myself. You made your choice. You chose them. So go be with them." Patricia gasped, clutching her pearls in a gesture so cliché, it would have been funny if it were not so pathetic. "You are kicking us out. From your own house. You will regret this, Audrey. You will be all alone in this big empty mansion, and you will come crawling back to us begging for forgiveness. I laughed. It was a genuine laugh, free and unburdened. Mother, look around you. I built this. I own this. I do not need you to survive. But let us see how long Brittany lasts when she has to ask you for money instead of stealing it from me. Let us see how much you love Grant when he is unemployed and sleeping on your couch. I pointed to the open door. Get out, both of you, and do not come back until you are ready to apologize to me. And I mean a real apology, not one of your gaslighting lectures. Patricia turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. She grabbed her purse and marched out the door, her heels clicking angrily on the stone. You are a cold, heartless girl, she spat as she passed me. I have no daughter. Good, I replied. Then you won't mind losing my number. My father looked at me one last time, a flicker of regret in his eyes, but he was too weak to act on it. He followed her out, like he always did, a shadow to her fire. I slammed the heavy front door shut. The sound was like a gunshot, final and decisive. I engaged the deadbolt. Click, click. I turned around and leaned my back against the wood, sliding down until I was sitting on the floor. The house was silent, completely and utterly silent. There was no husband lying to me upstairs. There was no sister stealing from me. There were no parents judging me. I was alone. And for the first time in my life, being alone did not feel like loneliness. It felt like freedom. The war for my family was over. Now the war for my empire was about to begin. The sun had barely risen over the Seattle skyline when Grant marched into the lobby of Lux Living headquarters. He was running on adrenaline and the delusional belief that if he moved fast enough, he could outrun the truth. He wore one of the few suits I had allowed him to keep, a navy blue number that was slightly too tight around the shoulders. A subtle reminder that he was no longer living in the custom-tailored world he had grown accustomed to. He did not go to his office first. He went straight to the server room on the 4th floor. He cornered Kevin, our director of IT, before the poor man had even finished his first cup of coffee. Grant slammed his hand on Kevin's desk, causing a stack of coding manuals to topple over. I want Audrey's access revoked, he demanded, his voice echoing in the quiet open-plan office. Cut her email. Disable her keycard. Lock her out of the shared drive. Do it now. Kevin blinked, confused and terrified. Sir, Mrs. Harrison is the founder. I cannot just lock her out of her own company. I am the CEO, Grant, shouted, his eyes wild. And I am telling you, she is a security risk. She is having a mental breakdown. She is vindictive and unstable. If she logs in, she will sabotage our data. Do you want to be responsible for losing the client database, Kevin? Do you want to be fired for insubordination? Kevin looked at Grant's shaking hands and the sweat beading on his forehead. He did what most employees do when faced with a screaming executive. He complied. He typed the command and hit enter. In Grant's mind, that keystroke was a victory. He thought he had just cut off my oxygen. In reality, he had just cut the brake line on a car he was driving toward a cliff. Grant marched to his corner office, slamming the door shut. He sat at his mahogany desk, the desk I paid for, and opened his laptop. He began typing furiously. He needed to control the narrative before I arrived. He needed the entire company to view me as a liability, not a leader. At 7:15 a.m., a notification pinged on the phones of all 200 Lux Living employees. The subject line read, "Urgent Leadership Update." I read it from my tablet while sitting at my kitchen island, sipping an espresso. The email was a masterpiece of corporate gaslighting. Dear team, it began. It is with a heavy heart that I announce Audrey is taking an indefinite leave of absence effective immediately. Due to recent personal struggles, she is seeking necessary psychological treatment to address severe emotional instability. During this difficult time, I will be assuming full control of all creative and operational decisions to ensure the stability of our company. Please respect her privacy and direct all urgent matters to me. I put the tablet down and laughed. He had actually done it. He had put it in writing. He had used his company email account to libel the majority shareholder and claim I was mentally unstable without a shred of medical evidence. He thought this email was his shield. He did not realize he had just handed me the weapon I needed to activate the immediate termination clause in his contract. Grant leaned back in his chair in that glass office feeling like a king. He watched the employees trickling in, seeing them whisper and look at their phones. He thought they were whispering about my breakdown. He did not realize they were whispering about him. Because what Grant forgot was that loyalty in business is not bought with titles, it is bought with respect. And while he was playing CEO, I was already on the phone with the board members he tried to deceive. The corporate war had started and he had just fired the first shot at a tank. By 9 o'clock, the office was no longer a place of business. It was a rumor mill churning out fiction at a record pace. Grant's email had lit the match, but Brittany was the one pouring gasoline on the flames. She arrived at the office wearing large sunglasses and a somber expression, playing the role of the concerned sister to perfection. Despite being stripped of her luxury assets the night before, she walked into the marketing department with her head held high, ready to spin the narrative of her life. She did not hide in her office. She went on a calculated tour. She stopped by the break room where the sales team gathered. She lingered at the receptionist's desk where the administrative assistants gossiped. Her voice was hushed and conspiratorial, designed to draw people in like moths to a flame. "It is just so tragic," she whispered to a group of junior copywriters, wiping away a non-existent tear. "Audrey has been under so much pressure lately. We tried to ignore the signs, but last night she finally snapped. She attacked Grant and me. She locked us in a bathroom and started screaming about affairs that were not happening. She was hallucinating. We are just trying to get her the help she needs before she hurts herself or the company." The staff ate it up. It was the kind of office drama that made the workday go faster. They nodded sympathetically, looking at the empty CEO office, with pity, not realizing they were mourning a leader who was perfectly sane and currently plotting their liberation from her kitchen table. Brittany framed herself as the victim and Grant as the hero, stepping up to save the sinking ship. It was a brilliant marketing campaign for a product that was completely fraudulent. But while Brittany was busy winning the war of words down in the architectural studio, Damon was winning the war of assets. The atmosphere in his department was different. It was the quiet intensity of a bomb squad. Damon did not gossip. He did not read Grant's email twice. He simply walked to the secure archives where the physical blueprints were stored. He began pulling the master files. These were not just sketches. These were the proprietary blueprints for our 3 biggest upcoming eco-villages. The technical specifications, the structural calculations, and the zoning approvals. This was the intellectual property that justified our stock valuation. He rolled them up one by one, placing them into waterproof black tubes. A junior architect watched him with wide eyes. "Damon, what are you doing?" the young man asked nervously. "Grant said we are on lockdown." Damon did not stop packing. He did not look up. He slid a hard drive into his briefcase. "Grant says a lot of things," Damon replied, his voice low and steady. "But Grant cannot draw a straight line with a ruler. I suggest you update your resume, kid. Changes are coming." He closed his briefcase with a snap. It was the only sound in the room. While the rest of the company was distracted by Brittany's soap opera, Damon had quietly secured the heart of the business. Grant could sit in the CEO chair all day, but without the designs Damon held in his hands, he was the captain of a ship with no engine. The silence in Damon's office was deafening compared to the noise in the hallway. It was the silence of a man who knew exactly where the structural weaknesses were and was preparing to pull the pin. The emergency shareholder meeting began at 10 o'clock sharp in the glass-walled conference room that offered a panoramic view of the city I had conquered. Grant stood at the head of the long mahogany table, a spot that I usually occupied. He was wearing that same ill-fitting navy suit, but he wore it with the unearned confidence of a man who believed his own press release. Around the table sat the 12 board members, including several old friends of my father, who looked uncomfortable and kept checking their watches. Grant cleared his throat and launched into the performance of a lifetime. He did not use notes. He relied on his natural charisma, the same charm that had fooled me for 5 years. He spoke about duty. He spoke about sacrifice. He painted a picture of a company in crisis, not because of financial mismanagement or market shifts, but because of my alleged emotional collapse. "We all love Audrey Grant," said his voice dripping with a sickening faux sympathy. "She is the visionary who started Lux Living. But we cannot let sentimentality sink this ship. The Audrey we knew is gone. The woman who attacked me and her sister yesterday is not the leader this company needs. Her behavior was erratic, violent, and deeply disturbing. She is a danger to herself, and more importantly, she is a danger to the integrity of our brand." He paused for effect, looking around the room to make eye contact with each member. He was playing on their fears. He knew that investors hate volatility, and he was framing me as the ultimate variable. He did not mention the affair. He did not mention the divorce. He framed his coup as a rescue mission. "We need stability." Grant continued, slamming his hands softly on the table for emphasis. "We need a steady hand at the wheel. I have stepped up to take on the burden of leadership during this tragic time. I am asking for your vote of confidence today, not for me, but for the hundreds of employees who rely on us for their livelihood. We must move forward with a formal motion to remove Audrey from her operational duties permanently." The room was silent. I could imagine the older board members nodding slowly. They were men of my father's generation, men who found it much easier to believe that a woman was hysterical than to believe a man was a liar. They liked Grant. He played golf with them. He laughed at their bad jokes. To them, he was a safe bet. Grant smiled internally. He could feel the room swaying in his direction. He thought he had won. He thought the doors were locked and his narrative was secure. He had no idea that while he was busy selling them a story of my destruction, I was standing in the elevator lobby adjusting my blazer and checking my lipstick in the reflection of the glass doors. He was talking about stability, but he was about to experience an earthquake. The double glass doors of the conference room did not slam open. They glided apart with a smooth hydraulic hiss that cut through the silence like a blade. Grant was mid-sentence, his hand raised in a gesture of mock solemnity, but his words died in his throat. All 12 board members turned, expecting to see a weeping woman in a bathrobe or perhaps security dragging a hysterical wife away. Instead, they saw me. I was wearing a bespoke white power suit that I had purchased in Milan, a stark contrast to the somber funeral tones of the room. My hair was styled to perfection, and my makeup was flawless. There were no red eyes. There was no shaking. Beside me, Ms. Parker walked with the grim determination of an executioner carrying a thick leather binder that held the true weight of the meeting. I walked into the room with the cadence of a predator entering its own territory. The silence was absolute. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the sharp intake of breath from Mr. Henderson, the chairman of the board. Grant looked like he had seen a ghost. His face went from triumphant to terrified in the span of a single heartbeat. "Audrey," he stammered, his voice cracking, "you should not be here. You are unwell." "Security. I called for security." I ignored him completely. I walked to the opposite end of the long mahogany table, directly facing him. I pulled out the empty chair my father used to sit in and sat down with deliberate grace. Ms. Parker placed the heavy binder in front of me with a thud that echoed like a gavel. "I am quite well, Grant," I said, my voice projecting clearly without a microphone. "In fact, I have never been more lucid. I heard your speech about stability. It was very moving. However, there is a small technicality you forgot to mention to these fine gentlemen." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat, looking nervously between Grant and me. "Audrey Grant says you are having a breakdown. He says you attacked him. If you are mentally compromised, we cannot have you running this company." I smiled at Mr. Henderson, a smile that did not reach my eyes. "Grant says a lot of things, but we are not here to discuss my marriage or Grant's fictional version of my mental health. You can vote to remove me as CEO. In fact, I encourage you to exercise your judgment. If you feel Grant is the leader you need, then by all means give him the title." Grant blinked, looking confused. He expected a fight. He expected me to beg for my job, to scream about his affair, to drag our personal life onto the boardroom table. He did not know how to handle my surrender. But I continued, leaning forward slightly, letting my gaze sweep across the room. If you fire me, you need to understand what leaves the building with me. You see, when I started this company 5 years ago before I married Grant, I was advised by my grandmother to protect my assets, specifically the intellectual property. I tapped the binder with a manicured fingernail, the brand name Lux Living, the logo, the proprietary software algorithms we use for client matching. And most importantly, the entire architectural design portfolio, including the 3 upcoming eco-villages. These are not owned by the corporation. They are licensed to the corporation by me personally, a license that is revocable at will. I watched the blood drain from Grant's face. He knew nothing about business law and he had never bothered to read the founding documents. So, go ahead, I said softly. Vote. Make Grant the CEO. But know that if you do, he will be the CEO of a company that is about to lose its name, its logo, and its product in exactly 5 minutes. Ms. Parker did not wait for the murmurs of confusion to subside before she delivered the fatal blow. She opened the thick leather binder with a deliberate snap that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. She slid a stack of documents across the polished mahogany table toward Mr. Henderson, the chairman of the board. The papers were old. The edges were slightly yellowed, with time a visual testament to their precedence. Gentlemen, Ms. Parker began, her voice projecting with the cool authority of a federal judge. You are operating under a fundamental misunderstanding of the corporate structure. You believe that Lux Living Incorporated owns the assets that generate 90% of your annual revenue. You believe the company owns the blueprints, the brand identity, the logo, and the proprietary sustainability algorithms. She paused, letting her gaze drift over each board member before landing squarely on Grant. You are mistaken. The corporation owns the office furniture, the computers, and the lease on this building. Everything else, everything that makes this company valuable, is the sole personal property of Audrey Harrison. Grant let out a scoff that was half laugh, half choke. That is ridiculous, he spat, leaning over the table. She created those designs while working here. That makes them work for hire. They belong to the company. That is Business Law 101, Audrey. You cannot claim ownership of work you did while drawing a salary. Ms. Parker adjusted her glasses and looked at Grant with pity. Actually, Mr. Harrison, these copyrights and trademarks were filed 6 months before this company was incorporated. They were registered 1 full year before you married my client. They are pre-existing personal assets. For the past 5 years, this company has been operating under a licensing agreement. A very generous agreement, I might add, which allowed the company to use Audrey's intellectual property for a nominal fee of $1 per year. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table and clasping my hands. I watched the color drain from Mr. Henderson's face as he read the clauses in the contract. He was a smart man. He realized instantly that the company was not a castle. It was a tent pitched in my backyard. And as of 8 o'clock this morning, I said, my voice steady and calm, I have exercised Clause 14 of that agreement. The license is revocable at will by the licensor. I have revoked it. The room erupted into chaos. Several board members stood up, shouting questions at once. Grant looked like he was going to be sick. What does that mean? Mr. Henderson asked, his voice trembling. It means, I replied, that if I walk out of this door without my position as CEO, this company ceases to exist as you know it. By noon today, you must strip the Lux Living name from the building. You must take down the website. You must halt construction on all 3 eco-village projects because you no longer have the legal right to use my blueprints. You will be a construction company with no designs, no brand, and no future. I stood up and smoothed out my blazer. Grant wants to lead this company. Fine, let him lead it. But he will be leading a shell corporation with 0 assets and a fleet of trucks he cannot afford to put gas in. The choice is yours, gentlemen. You can have your new CEO, or you can have a business. You cannot have both. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of millions of dollars evaporating into thin air. I saw the board members look at Grant not with respect, but with sudden and intense hostility. He had brought them to the edge of a cliff, and I had just shown them how deep the drop was. The coup was over. The hostage negotiation had begun. The silence that followed my declaration was not the silence of respect. It was the silence of a bomb squad realizing the timer had just hit 0. 12 wealthy men looked at the documents Ms. Parker had distributed, and then they looked at their tablets checking the company's current stock price, which was currently trading at $45 a share. They knew that the moment I walked out of that room and issued a press release stating that Lux Living no longer had the legal right to build its own designs, that stock would be worth less than the paper it was printed on. Mr. Henderson was the first to break the paralysis. He turned to Grant, his face flushing a deep, dangerous shade of purple. "Grant, is this true?" he demanded, his voice trembling with suppressed rage. "Did you know about this licensing agreement? Did you know that the company does not actually own the intellectual property?" Grant stammered, wiping sweat from his forehead with a shaking hand. "I knew there was some paperwork," he mumbled. "But I thought it was just a formality. I thought once we got married, her assets became community property. I thought the company absorbed everything. You thought," Mr. Henderson roared, slamming his fist on the table, causing the crystal water pitcher to jump. "You are the CEO, Grant. It is your job to know. You launched a hostile takeover of your own wife's company without checking if we actually owned the product we are selling. You are telling me that we are about to lose the Eco Village project. That is a $200 million contract, Grant." Grant tried to rally. He stood up, trying to regain his height advantage, but he looked small. "She is bluffing," he shouted, pointing a finger at me. "She would not destroy her own company. She needs this money just as much as we do. She is just trying to scare us. Do not let her manipulate you. We can fight this in court. We can claim implied consent." Ms. Parker cleared her throat. It was a soft sound, but it cut through Grant's shouting like a knife. "Actually, Mr. Harrison," she said coolly, "we have already filed the cease and desist orders. As of this morning, any use of the Lux Living brand or blueprints constitutes willful infringement. We will not just sue the company. We will sue each board member individually for negligence." That was the tipping point. The concept of personal liability turned the board from a group of investors into a pack of wolves. They did not care about Grant's marriage. They did not care about his leadership ambitions. They cared about their own bank accounts. Another board member, a man named Mr. Sterling, who had played golf with Grant every Sunday for 3 years, stood up. "You idiot," he spat at Grant. "You absolute incompetent fool. You dragged us into this mess because you could not keep your pants zipped, and now you want us to pay for your divorce. You told us Audrey was the liability. It looks like you are the one who is going to bankrupt us." The room erupted. Men who had been nodding along to Grant's speech 10 minutes ago were now shouting over each other, demanding answers, demanding resignations, and distancing themselves from him as fast as possible. Grant looked around the room, realizing that his allies were not friends. They were sharks, and he was bleeding in the water. I sat back in my chair and watched the carnage. I did not have to raise my voice. I did not have to argue. I had simply pulled a loose thread and watched Grant's entire suit unravel. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for mercy for me to stop the attack. But I just looked at him with the same indifference he had shown me when he slept with my sister. He wanted to be the center of attention. Now he was. The chaos in the boardroom was reaching a fever pitch when a chair scraped loudly against the floor. It was a harsh mechanical sound that silenced the screaming board members instantly. Damon stood up at the far end of the table. Throughout the entire meeting, he had remained silent, watching Grant dig his own grave with a stoic expression. Now he adjusted his tie and buttoned his suit jacket with the slow, deliberate movements of a man who was about to deliver a eulogy. He did not look at me. He looked directly at Grant. "Mr. Henderson asked about the Eco Village project," Damon said, his voice deep and resonant, filling the room without effort. "He asked if we could still build it without the Lux Living brand. The answer is no. But not just because of the blueprints." Grant wiped sweat from his upper lip. "Sit down, Damon," he snapped, trying to regain control. "This does not concern you. This is a shareholder matter." "Actually, Grant, it concerns me deeply," Damon replied calmly. Because as the lead architect and chief of design, I am the one responsible for executing those blueprints, and I have a moral clause in my contract too, one that I take very seriously. He reached into his inner jacket pocket and pulled out a plain white envelope. He slid it down the long mahogany table. It spun slowly across the polished wood, eventually coming to a stop right in front of Mr. Henderson. "That is my formal letter of resignation," Damon stated. "Effective immediately. I cannot in good conscience work for a CEO who achieved his position through deceit, nepotism, and the attempted destruction of the company founder. I do not build houses for home wreckers." Grant laughed nervously, looking around the room for support. "Fine leave," he scoffed. "You are just one architect, Damon. We can hire someone else. There are plenty of people who would kill to work for Luxa Living. You are replaceable." Damon smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that did not reach his eyes. "I expected you to say that, Grant. Which is why I took the liberty of speaking with my team this morning." He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen, projecting a document onto the smart wall behind him. It was a list. A long, scrolling list of names. "That is the resignation list of the entire senior design team," Damon announced, pointing at the screen. "The structural engineers, the landscape architects, the project managers, and the entire sustainability research division. They have all tendered their resignations effective noon today. They are not following a title grant, they are following Audrey." The board members stared at the screen in horror. They were watching the company's talent pool drain away in real time. Without the IP, they had no product. Without the team, they had no labor. Grant was not the captain of a sinking ship anymore. He was the captain of a submarine with the hatch open. Mr. Henderson looked at the list and then at Grant. His face was pale. "You lost the team," he whispered. "You lost the entire department in one morning." I sat back in my chair and watched the realization wash over Grant. He had wanted to steal my company. He had wanted to take my house, my money, and my reputation. But he forgot the one thing you cannot steal. You cannot steal loyalty. You have to earn it. And Grant Harrison was chemically incapable of earning anything other than contempt, Ms. Parker did not give Grant a moment to recover from the shock of losing the intellectual property. She simply turned a page in her thick leather binder, the crisp sound echoing like a gunshot in the silent boardroom. While the board members were still murmuring about the disastrous loss of the eco-village blueprints, she cleared her throat and addressed them with the clinical detachment of a surgeon. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice cutting through the noise, "while the loss of the company's core assets is indeed a crisis, we must also address the immediate liability sitting at the head of this table. Mr. Harrison is under the impression that even if he is removed, he is entitled to a golden parachute." Grant straightened his tie, trying to salvage a shred of dignity. "That is correct," he said, his voice shaky but defiant. "My contract states that if I am terminated without cause, I am owed a severance package of $2 million plus accelerated vesting of my stock options. You can fire me, Audrey, but you will have to pay me to leave." I leaned back in my chair and crossed my legs. I watched him cling to the hope of a payout like a drowning man clutching a piece of driftwood. It was almost pitiful. "Actually, Grant," I said softly, "you are forgetting Clause 17, subsection B." Grant frowned. "What are you talking about?" "The morality clause," Ms. Parker announced, reading from the document. "The executive may be terminated for cause immediately and without compensation if he engages in any conduct that brings public disrepute, scandal, or ridicule to the corporation or its officers." Grant laughed, a harsh barking sound that made everyone flinch. "Public disrepute," he mocked. "This is a private family matter, Audrey. Nobody knows about what happened yesterday except the people in this room. You cannot use a private divorce to trigger a public scandal clause. You are reaching." I pulled my tablet from my bag and woke up the screen. I slid it across the long mahogany table toward him. The glow of the screen illuminated his pale face. "Private," I repeated. "Grant, you clearly underestimate the speed of digital media. I took the liberty of sending a tip to the Seattle Business Journal this morning, and it appears they have already run the story." Grant stared at the tablet. The headline was bold, brutal, and impossible to ignore. Tech heiress evicts cheating CEO, husband after catching him with her sister. Below the headline was a blurry but unmistakable photo of Grant standing in my driveway, wrapped in a towel flanked by police officers. I watched his eyes scan the article. It detailed the police report, the restraining order, and the sudden resignation of the entire design team. It was not just a story, it was a character assassination. The board members immediately pulled out their own phones. I heard the collective gasps and mutters of disgust as they read the article. "This is trending on Twitter, Mr. Sterling said, his face turning red. "People are already using the hashtag #EvictGrant. He looked at Grant with pure contempt. "You are a laughingstock. We cannot have a CEO who is being memeified for adultery. It makes the company look incompetent." Grant looked up, his eyes wild with panic. "You did this," he whispered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You leaked this. You destroyed my reputation on purpose." I stood up slowly, smoothing the lapel of my white suit. "You destroyed your reputation when you decided to sleep with my sister in my house, Grant. I just made sure the shareholders knew who they were really doing business with. And because of this article, your termination is classified as for cause. That means no $2 million, no stock options, no health insurance. You leave this building with absolutely nothing." Mr. Henderson slammed his hand on the table. "Enough," he roared. "I call for a vote to terminate Grant Harrison immediately under the morality clause. All in favor?" Every hand in the room went up. Grant slumped in his chair, defeated by the very fine print he had never bothered to read. He was not just fired, he was erased. The vote was not a debate. It was an execution. One by one, 12 hands raised into the air. There was no hesitation. There was no pity. These men were capitalists, and they knew that keeping Grant Harrison employed was now a financial suicide mission. Mr. Henderson looked at the sea of raised hands and then turned his gaze back to Grant. "The motion carries unanimously," he said. "You are relieved of your duties effective immediately. Please hand over your badge and your company phone." Grant stood frozen at the head of the table. His brain seemed unable to process the reality of the situation. He looked at Mr. Sterling, his golf partner. He looked at Mr. Davis, who had attended our wedding. He was searching for a friend, but he found only strangers who were worried about their quarterly dividends. "This is a mistake," Grant stammered, his voice rising to a shout. "You are making a huge mistake. You cannot run this company without me. I know the operations. I know the clients. Audrey has not been here in 6 months. She is rusty. She will drive this stock into the ground." Mr. Henderson did not argue. He simply pressed a small button on the console in front of him. It was the silent alarm that summoned corporate security. Grant saw the gesture and snapped. He slammed his hands down on the mahogany table, leaning over Mr. Henderson. "Do not you dare call security on me," he screamed, saliva flying from his mouth. "I am the CEO. I built this quarter's strategy. I am the reason you people are rich. You cannot treat me like some low-level employee caught stealing office supplies." I sat perfectly still, watching him unravel. It was fascinating to see how quickly the facade of the sophisticated executive crumbled to reveal the petulant child underneath. Grant was not a leader, he was an actor who had forgotten his lines. The double doors slid open again. This time it was not a lawyer entering. It was the head of building security, a man named Marcus, who had been a linebacker in college. He was followed by 2 guards. They did not look at Grant with fear. They looked at him as a liability to be removed. "Mr. Harrison," Marcus said, stepping forward, his voice calm and deep. "We need you to come with us, sir." Grant recoiled as if he had been burned. "Do not touch me," he hissed. "I am not going anywhere until I speak to my lawyer. This vote is illegal. I will sue this entire board. I will burn this company to the ground." Mr. Henderson stood up. His patience had evaporated. "You have no lawyer, Grant, because you cannot afford one. And you are not burning anything. You are trespassing." "Marcus, remove him." Grant tried to dodge them. He actually tried to run around the table toward the other exit. It was a pathetic display. Marcus caught him by the arm with effortless strength. Grant thrashed, shouting profanities that echoed off the glass walls. The board members looked away, embarrassed to have ever associated themselves with such a man. "Get your hands off me!" Grant yelled as they dragged him toward the door. "I own this place. Audrey, tell them who I am." I did not speak. I did not look at him. I looked at the view of the city skyline, the city that I had helped build. As they hauled him through the open doors, I could see the faces of the employees outside. They were pressed against the glass of their cubicles, recording everything on their phones. Grant Harrison, the man who had walked in that morning believing he was a king, was being dragged out like an unruly patron at a dive bar. The doors slid shut, cutting off his screams. The room fell into a heavy, stunned silence. The king was dead. Long live the queen. The elevator ride down to the lobby was a silent funeral procession for Grant's ego. I took the private executive lift while Marcus and his team stuffed Grant into the service elevator, usually reserved for trash and deliveries. When the doors slid open on the ground floor, the lobby was already transformed into an amphitheater. Word travels faster than light in a corporate environment, and every receptionist, courier, and junior associate had found a reason to be near the front desk. They wanted to see the fall of the tyrant. And Grant did not disappoint. He emerged, flanked by the guards, his suit rumpled, and his face a mottled mix of red rage and pale fear. He tried to walk with some semblance of dignity, shaking off Marcus's grip, but he just looked like a prisoner trying to pretend he was a guest. He headed straight for the glass revolving doors, desperate to escape the gaze of the people he had terrorized for years. But I was already there, standing by the security desk. "Stop him," I said. My voice was not loud, but in the hushed acoustic perfection of the lobby, it cracked like a whip. Marcus stepped in front of Grant, blocking his path to freedom. Grant spun around, his eyes narrowing. "What do you want now, Audrey? You fired me. You humiliated me. Let me leave." I walked toward him, stopping just outside of striking distance. "You are leaving, Grant, but you are leaving with exactly what you came in with, which is nothing." I held out my hand, palm up. The phone, the laptop, the keycard, and the wallet containing the corporate American Express. Grant clutched his jacket. "This is my phone," he argued. "My contacts are on here. It is a company-issued device paid for by the IT budget." I corrected him. "Hand it over. Or do we need to call the police for theft of corporate property too? I think you have had enough interaction with law enforcement for 1 week." Grant looked at the guards, then at the silent crowd of employees. He knew he was beaten. With trembling hands, he reached into his pocket. He slammed the phone into my hand. Then he unslung the laptop bag and dropped it at my feet. He threw the wallet on the reception desk. There, he spat. "Are you happy now?" "Not quite," I said, pointing through the glass walls to the reserved parking spot right in front of the entrance. "The keys to the Porsche, Grant." Grant's jaw dropped. "You cannot take the car. How am I supposed to get home?" I shrugged. "I hear the bus system is excellent. Or you can walk. It is only 12 miles to my mother's house. Consider it time to reflect on your choices." He stood there paralyzed. The Porsche was the last symbol of his status, the last thing that made him feel like a man of importance. Giving up those keys was like giving up his identity. Marcus stepped forward, looming over him. "The keys, sir." Grant reached into his pocket and fished out the heavy fob. He did not hand it to me. He threw it across the lobby floor. It skid across the polished marble, coming to rest near the janitor's cart. "Get him out of here," I said, turning my back. Marcus and the guards grabbed Grant by the arms. He did not fight this time. He went limp, defeated. They marched him to the revolving doors and shoved him through. He stumbled out onto the concrete sidewalk, blinking in the harsh daylight. It was a perfect mirror image of the scene at the house. First, he lost the home he did not own. Now, he lost the company he did not build. He was back on the street, exactly where he belonged. You would think that being publicly evicted and fired in the span of 24 hours would teach a man humility. But for Grant Harrison, rock bottom was just a foundation to build a new tower of delusion. He did not leave Seattle. He did not go to his mother's house to reflect on his failures. Instead, he went straight to a strip mall law firm on the outskirts of the city and filed a lawsuit that was breathless in its audacity. 3 days after the boardroom coup, I sat in my home office reading the thick stack of papers that a process server had slapped into my hand at the grocery store. It was a formal complaint filed in the Superior Court of Washington. The plaintiffs were Grant Harrison and, strangely enough, Brittany, who was listed as an intervening party claiming emotional distress. But the core of the lawsuit was financial. Grant was suing for 50% of all marital assets accumulated during our 5-year union. His lawyer, a man named Saul, who advertised on late-night television, had clearly convinced him that Washington's community property laws were his golden ticket. The logic was simple and on the surface legally sound. Since we did not have a prenuptial agreement regarding cash savings, Grant believed that every dollar I earned while acting as CEO was joint property. I could almost hear Grant's voice in the legal jargon. He claimed that I was hiding assets. He claimed that the company's valuation was partially due to his leadership. He estimated our liquid joint assets to be in the range of $10 to $15 million. He wanted half. He wanted $5 million in cash immediately, plus alimony to maintain the lifestyle to which he had become accustomed. Brittany had added her own demands. She was claiming that by evicting her without notice, I had caused her severe psychological trauma and damaged her reputation. She wanted compensation for pain and suffering. It was a masterclass in entitlement. They truly believed that because I was rich, they were entitled to a severance package for betraying me. I picked up the phone and called Ms. Parker. She answered on the first ring. "I assume you have read the filing," she said, her voice dry. "I have," I replied, flipping to the page where Grant demanded access to my offshore accounts. "He thinks I have millions sitting in the Cayman Islands." "He is desperate," Ms. Parker said. "He is maxed out on his personal credit cards and he needs a win. He is banking on you settling out of court to avoid the publicity. He thinks you will write him a check for $1 million just to make him go away." I looked out the window at the rain falling on the garden. $1 million. It was a lot of money to most people. To Grant, it was the difference between working for a living and continuing his life of leisure. "Set up the deposition," I said. "Are you sure?" Ms. Parker asked. "We can file a motion to dismiss based on his infidelity." "No," I said. "A dismissal is too quick. He needs to see the numbers. He thinks I am sitting on a mountain of cash. I want to look him in the eye when he finds out what is actually in those accounts. Schedule a mediation session. Tell them I am ready to divide the assets." I hung up the phone. Grant wanted half. He wanted a fair division of everything we built together. I decided right then and there to give him exactly what he asked for. He was so focused on the assets he forgot that marriage is also a partnership in liability. He wanted to split the pie, but he did not realize the pie was poisoned. The mediation room at Parker and Associates was designed to intimidate. It was a glass box suspended 40 floors above the city, filled with black leather chairs, and a table so polished it reflected the greed on the faces of the people sitting across from me. The atmosphere was not one of reconciliation, but of a shakedown. Grant sat on the left, wearing a suit that was clearly off the rack, fidgeting with a cheap ballpoint pen. Brittany sat next to him, looking like the cat who had not only eaten the canary, but was now demanding dessert. But the most infuriating presence in the room was my mother. Patricia had insisted on attending, claiming she was there as a neutral moral support. In reality, she was there to ensure the wire transfer went through. She sat between the cheaters and me, her face set in a mask of long-suffering matriarchal concern. "Audrey, please," she began, her voice echoing in the sterile room. "Let us not drag this out. Look at your sister. Look at Grant. They have nothing. You have everything. Is it really so hard to show a little mercy?" I stared at her. "Mercy," I repeated. "Yes, mercy," Patricia insisted. "Brittany needs a fresh start. She is young, she made a mistake, but you cannot expect her to rebuild her life with zero resources. You need to give her a nest egg, a condo in Bellevue, a reliable car, and a monthly stipend until she gets back on her feet. It is the least you can do as her older sister. Brittany smirked. It was a subtle movement, just a twitch of the corner of her mouth, but I saw it. She leaned back in the leather chair, crossing her arms. Mom is right, Audrey, she said, her voice dripping with entitlement. You have millions sitting in the bank, you won't even miss it. I just want what is fair. I suffered emotional distress too, you know. Being kicked out on the street was traumatic. Grant's lawyer, a man named Saul, who smelled faintly of tobacco and desperation, cleared his throat. He opened a thin file folder. Let us stick to the numbers. My client asserts that under Washington state law, 50% of all liquid assets accumulated during the marriage belong to him. Based on Lux Living's revenue reports from the last 5 years, we estimate the marital estate to be worth approximately $12 million. Therefore, we are asking for a lump sum payment of $6 million to Mr. Harrison. Grant looked at me, his eyes shining with avarice. $6 million. He had already spent it in his head. He was picturing the new apartment, the new car, the vacations he would take with my sister. He tapped the table with his finger. And I want the jewelry back, he added. The watch, the cufflinks. Those were gifts. You cannot keep gifts, Audrey. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded in my lap. I watched them construct their castle in the clouds. They truly believed that revenue equaled profit. They believed that because I lived a life of luxury, I had a vault full of gold coins like a cartoon dragon. They had never once asked to see the balance sheets. They just assumed the money was there because I always made sure the bills were paid. Ms. Parker adjusted her glasses and looked at Saul with a predator's patience. She reached under the table and pulled out a heavy banker's box. She did not place a check on the table. She placed a stack of ledgers that hit the wood with a heavy, ominous thud. We are perfectly happy to divide the community property, Ms. Parker said, her voice devoid of emotion. In fact, Audrey insists on it. A complete and total 50-50 split of all assets and all liabilities accumulated during the marriage. Grant smiled. Great. Cut the check. I finally smiled back. It was the smile of a trap snapping shut. Oh, Grant, I said softly. There is no check, but there is a calculator. I hope you brought one. You are going to need it. Grant leaned forward, resting his elbows on the polished glass table, his eyes bright with the fever of easy money. He had spent the last 20 minutes lecturing the room on the valuation of my company, reciting numbers he had skimmed from press releases and quarterly newsletters. He looked at his lawyer, Saul, and then back at me with a smirk that suggested he had already won the lottery. Let us be real, Audrey Grant said, his voice dripping with condescension. I know the numbers. I was the CEO, remember? The Waterfront Lofts project brought in $3 million in revenue last year. The Green Valley Eco Estate pre-sales topped $4 million. And the licensing deals for the smart home technology generated another $3 million easy. He held up both hands, fingers splayed as if he were physically holding the cash. That is $10 million in liquid assets sitting in the operating accounts. And that is a conservative estimate. I am not even counting the real estate portfolio or the offshore holdings I know you have. You always like to keep a safety net. Well, now that net is community property. My mother nodded vigorously from her seat beside him. Exactly, she chimed in. You have always been a hoarder, Audrey. You sit on money while your family struggles. It is time to share the wealth. $10 million is more than enough for you to split with your husband and sister. Do not be greedy. Brittany was practically salivating. She was already mentally spending her share, calculating how many designer handbags and first-class tickets she could buy with her cut of the $10 million. She looked at me with a mixture of triumph and pity, believing that I was cornered. I sat silently watching Grant perform his mental gymnastics. He was doing what he always did. He looked at the top-line revenue and ignored the bottom-line expenses. He saw the money coming in, but he never paid attention to the money going out. He assumed that business was magic, that houses built themselves and permits were free. I waited until he finished his victory lap. I waited until the silence in the room stretched thin. Then I reached for the thick black binder that Ms. Parker had placed next to me. It was heavy. It contained 5 years of tax returns, loan agreements, and lien statements. I placed my hand on the cover. "You are absolutely right, Grant," I said, my voice calm and even. "The waterfront project did bring in $3 million, and the Green Valley estate did generate $4 million in pre-sales. Your memory for revenue is excellent." Grant leaned back, crossing his arms with a smug grin. "See? She admits it. Cut the check, Saul." I smiled. It was a sharp, dangerous smile. I slid the heavy binder across the glass table. It made a low, grinding sound before coming to a stop directly in front of him. "But there is a difference between revenue and profit," Grant, I continued. "A difference you never bothered to learn because I was the one paying the bills while you were busy playing executive. You listed the income. Now open that binder and look at the debts. Because under community property laws, you do not just split the bank account, you split the bills." Grant looked at the binder, his smile faltering slightly. "What debts?" he asked, his voice losing some of its bravado. "The company is debt-free. You told me the company was debt-free." I leaned forward. "I told you the company was solvent, Grant. But we are not talking about the company anymore. We are talking about our personal marital assets. The assets you funded with your lifestyle. Open it." Grant hesitated. The room went deadly quiet. He reached out and flipped open the cover. The first page was a summary sheet printed in bold red ink. He stared at it. His face went from flushed to pale in the span of a heartbeat. He was looking at the reality of his own extravagance, and for the first time, he realized that the $10 million he thought he was stealing had already been spent. Grant flipped through the pages with the frantic energy of a man whose parachute had failed to open. He scanned the columns looking for the 7-figure sums he had seen on the company revenue dashboards. He was looking for the offshore accounts, the hidden caches of cash, the accumulated wealth of a CEO. But page after page revealed the same terrifying story: zeros. He stopped at the final summary page. His finger traced the bottom line and his face went gray. $4,212, he whispered. His voice was barely audible. "That is it. That is the balance of your personal checking account." He looked up at me, his eyes wide with genuine horror. "Where is the money, Audrey? You made $3 million last year alone. I saw the wire transfers, I saw the profit margins. You are hiding it. Saul, she is hiding it. This is fraud." I took a sip of water, watching his panic rise. "I'm not hiding anything, Grant. You just never bothered to ask how my finances were structured. You assumed that because I earned millions, I kept millions." Ms. Parker leaned forward, tapping a specific clause in the financial disclosure. "Mr. Harrison, if you had looked at the corporate bylaws, you would have noticed a mandatory sweep clause. It was established the day Audrey founded the company, long before she met you." Grant looked confused. "A sweep clause?" "Exactly," I said. "Every quarter, all net profits generated by Lux Living beyond operating expenses and my modest base salary are automatically transferred out of the company accounts. They do not go to me. They do not go to the Cayman Islands." I pointed to the document in his hand. "Look at the beneficiary, Grant." He looked down. His lips moved as he read the name. "The Hope Foundation." Brittany frowned. "What is the Hope Foundation?" "It is a nonprofit organization I established 10 years ago," I explained. "It funds educational programs for underprivileged children in the foster care system. It builds schools. It provides scholarships. It is an irrevocable charitable trust." The silence in the room was absolute. My mother looked like I had just confessed to murder. "You give it away," she gasped. "You give millions of dollars to strangers while your own family struggles. Audrey, have you lost your mind?" I looked at her coldly. "I do not give it away, Mother. I invest it in the future. And because the trust is irrevocable and the transfers are automated, that money is not considered a personal asset. It never touches my personal account. It belongs to the children." Ms. Parker delivered the final legal blow. Since the money is donated immediately upon receipt, it is not considered marital property subject to division. There are no savings to split, Mr. Harrison. There is no nest egg. Audrey's personal wealth consists of the clothes on her back, the car she drives, and the $4,000 currently in her checking account. Grant slumped in his chair. He looked physically ill. You mean to tell me, he stammered, that I have been married to a millionaire who is technically broke? I smiled. Technically, yes. I live on a salary, Grant. A salary that covered the mortgage, the lease on your Porsche, and your expensive dinners. But the millions, those were never mine to keep, and they certainly aren't yours to take. You are suing for 50% of a checking account that barely covers next month's electric bill. Saul closed his folder. He knew the case was dead. There was no pot of gold at the end of this rainbow, only a tax-deductible receipt for a charity that did more good in one day than Grant had done in his entire life. The greed that had driven them here had just collided with the one thing they could not fight: aggressive philanthropy. The silence in the conference room was thick enough to choke on. Grant was staring at the $4,000 balance on the summary sheet, looking like a man who had just realized his winning lottery ticket was printed on toilet paper. His lawyer Saul was already packing his briefcase, his body language screaming that he knew he would never see a dime in legal fees. But Miss Parker was not finished. She reached into her banker's box one last time. "We have established the assets," Miss Parker said, her voice sharp and metallic. "Or rather, the lack thereof. But under the petition you filed, Mr. Harrison, you demanded a full, equitable division of the marital estate. That means we must also divide the liabilities." Grant looked up, blinking. "Liabilities?" he mumbled. "I told you. We have no debt. The house is in a trust. The cars are leased. We are clean." I laughed. It was a dark sound. "You are clean, Grant. But you have been very busy." Ms. Parker slid a new document across the table. It was not a bank statement. It was a forensic accounting report detailing activity that Grant thought was hidden in the dark corners of the internet. During the discovery phase of this lawsuit, Ms. Parker explained, "We ran a credit check on you, Grant. A very deep credit check. We found 3 personal loans from commercial banks totaling $500,000. We found maxed-out credit lines on 4 separate cards totaling another $200,000. Grant shifted in his seat, sweat beading on his forehead. "That was for business," he stammered. "I was investing. I was diversifying our portfolio into cryptocurrency. It was a sure thing. I was doing it for us, Audrey." I leaned forward. "You were gambling, Grant. You took out loans in your name to buy digital coins that are now worth pennies. But that is not the worst part, is it?" I turned the page of the report, revealing a list of names that were definitely not banks. Vladislav Ivanov. "The Red Dragon Group. Quick Cash LLC. You went to hard money lenders," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "You went to loan sharks, Grant. You borrowed another $1 million at 40% interest, and you lost it all." Brittany gasped, pulling her hand away from Grant's arm as if he were radioactive. $1 million, she shrieked. "You owe the mafia $1 million." Grant turned on her, his face red with panic. "It is not the mafia, Brittany. It is private equity, and it does not matter because it is community debt." He pointed a shaking finger at me. "I took those loans out while we were married. The law says debts incurred during the marriage are shared. You have to pay half, Audrey. You are liable for 50% of this mess." He looked at me with a desperate, malicious hope. He realized he could not get my money, but he thought he could drag me down into his hole. He thought he had found a way to make me pay for his mistakes. Saul, the lawyer, stopped packing. He looked at the documents and then at Grant with pure horror. "You idiot," Saul whispered. "You filed a suit claiming 50% of the estate. You just legally argued that she is responsible for half your debt. But since she has no liquid assets to pay it, and you have no job to pay it, you have just tied an anchor around your own neck." I sat back and watched the realization hit them. Grant had thought he was fighting for a fortune. In reality, he had been fighting to share a bankruptcy. He had dug a grave so deep that he could not see the sky, and now he was trying to pull me in with him, claiming it was our grave. Yes, Grant, I said calmly. It is community debt. Congratulations. You finally brought something to this marriage. A $2 million deficit. Miss Parker did not blink. She did not flinch at the mention of the loan sharks or the astronomical interest rates. She simply adjusted the cuffs of her blouse and looked at Grant with the clinical detachment of a coroner examining a corpse. We accept, she said. The room went silent. Grant blinked, his mouth hanging open. Excuse me, he asked. We accept your petition for a full equitable division of the marital estate, Ms. Parker repeated slowly, as if speaking to a slow child. You are absolutely right, Mr. Harrison. Under the law, Audrey is responsible for 50% of the community debt. That amounts to roughly $1 million of liability. Grant let out a breath he had been holding. He slumped back in his chair, a grin spreading across his face. See? He said, turning to Brittany. I told you she would cave. She has to pay. She is going to write a check for $1 million to clear her name. We are saved. Not quite, I said, cutting off his celebration. Miss Parker slid a single sheet of paper across the glass table. It was a stock transfer certificate. Since we are dividing everything equally, I am settling my share of the debt right now, Miss Parker explained. Audrey is transferring 50,000 shares of Lux Living Inc. to your name, Grant. Based on the valuation you provided in your opening statement, these shares are worth exactly $1 million. Grant stared at the paper. His hands began to shake. This transfer satisfies Audrey's obligation to the marital estate, Ms. Parker continued. She has paid her half of the debt by giving you her half of the company. Now you own the majority stock. You have the assets you wanted, and consequently you now assume full responsibility for the cash repayment of the loans. Grant stood up, knocking his chair over. You cannot do this, he screamed. That stock is worthless. You stripped the IP, you took the brand, the company is a shell, those shares are just paper. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand. But Grant, 10 minutes ago you argued under oath that the company was worth millions. You presented charts. You claim the revenue was real. You cannot claim the company is a gold mine when you want a payout, and then claim it is garbage when you have to pay a debt. The court will use your valuation. I pointed to the certificate. You wanted the company, Grant. Now you have it. You are the majority shareholder of a company that generates zero revenue, and you personally owe $2 million to violent men who do not care about stock options. Saul the lawyer closed his briefcase with a loud snap. He stood up. Mr. Harrison, I am terminating my representation. I do not represent clients who perjure themselves regarding asset valuation. You are on your own. Grant looked around the room wild-eyed. He turned to Brittany, grabbing her arm. We have to go. We have to leave town. The Russians will be looking for us. Brittany yanked her arm away, looking at him with pure disgust. We, she spat. There is no we, Grant. This is your debt. You signed the papers. I am not going down with you. Ms. Parker cleared her throat. Actually, Ms. Miller, since you have been cohabitating with Mr. Harrison and enjoying the proceeds of these loans, the jewelry, the vacations, the lifestyle, you could be named as a beneficiary of the fraud in a criminal investigation. If the creditors cannot find Grant, they will certainly come looking for the woman standing next to him. Brittany's face went white. She looked at Grant not as a lover, but as a disease. She had bet on the wrong horse, and now she realized she was locked in the stable with him while the barn was burning down. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. The meeting is adjourned, I said. Grant, enjoy the company. I hear the office view is lovely, even if the lights are about to be cut off. The realization hit Brittany like a physical blow. She stared at the man she had destroyed her family for, and saw him for the first time, without the filter of wealth. The charm was gone. The potential was gone. All that remained was a sweating, desperate man who had just anchored her to a debt that would likely get them killed. She looked at the diamond bracelet on her wrist, a gift from Grant last Christmas, and realized it was probably bought with blood money that she now had to pay back. You lied to me. Brittany whispered, her voice trembling with a rage that was terrifying in its intensity. You told me you were rich. You told me Audrey was the stingy one. You told me we were going to travel the world. Grant reached out a hand to calm her. Baby, listen to me, he pleaded. We can fix this. We just need to restructure the debt. If we sell the jewelry and maybe borrow against your car, we can pay off the interest for a few months. That was the spark that ignited the powder keg. Brittany did not just scream. She lunged. She threw herself across the gap between their chairs, her manicured nails aiming for his eyes. She was a woman who had bet her entire future on a winning ticket and just found out it was a forgery. You ruined my life, she screamed, clawing at his face as he tried to shield himself. You are a loser, Grant. A broke, lying loser. I left my family for you. I humiliated my sister for you. And you have nothing. Grant fell backward, his chair tipping over with a crash. Brittany fell on top of him, hitting him with her fists, scratching at his neck, screaming obscenities that echoed off the glass walls. It was primal and pathetic. The two people who had claimed their love was superior to my marriage were now rolling on the floor of a law firm, tearing each other apart over money. Saul the lawyer backed away, hugging his briefcase to his chest, clearly terrified of getting involved in a domestic assault. My mother sat frozen in her chair. Her mouth was slightly open, her eyes wide with shock. She watched the golden couple, the daughter she adored, and the son-in-law she championed, degrade themselves into animals. She looked at Grant's red face as he tried to push Brittany off him. She heard the lies he was shouting. She saw the reality of the man she had defended just an hour ago. He is broke, Patricia whispered to herself. The words tasted like ash. He is a fraud. I stood up and walked over to her. I placed a hand on the back of her chair, not to comfort her, but to make sure she was paying attention. Look at them, Mother, I said, my voice cutting through the noise of the fight. Look at the prize you wanted me to keep. Look at the man you said I should forgive. Patricia looked up at me. Her eyes were filled with tears, not of sadness, but of humiliation. She realized she had backed the wrong horse. She had thrown away her competent, successful daughter for a charlatan who was currently being beaten by her youngest child. Do something, Patricia begged, grabbing my hand. Stop them, Audrey. Call security. This is embarrassing. I pulled my hand away. No, Mother, I said. You wanted them together. You said they belonged together. Well, now they are together. In debt, in trouble, and in misery. This is the family you chose. I turned and walked toward the door, signaling Ms. Parker to follow. Behind me, the sounds of the struggle continued. Brittany sobbing and Grant shouting for help. I did not look back. I walked out of the mediation room and into the hallway, leaving them to the hell they had created for themselves. The silence of the elevator lobby felt like a sanctuary. I pressed the down button, ready to descend back to earth, leaving the wreckage of my past 40 floors above me. The elevator ride down took 40 seconds. 40 seconds of blissful silence after the cacophony of my family imploding upstairs. Ms. Parker stood beside me, checking her watch, already calculating the billable hours for the morning's entertainment. When the door slid open, revealing the polished marble lobby, I expected to walk out into the sunlight a free woman. But the ghosts of my past were faster than I thought. The service elevator doors opened a few yards away, and my parents spilled out. They looked disheveled, their faces pale and stripped of the arrogance they had worn when they walked in. They saw me and practically ran across the lobby, ignoring the curious glances of the security guards. Audrey, wait. Patricia called out, her voice shrill with desperation. She reached for my arm, but I stepped out of reach. She grabbed air. We need to talk, she panted, breathless from the panic. We did not know. You have to believe us. We had no idea Grant was in that kind of trouble. We thought he was successful. We thought he was taking care of things. I stopped and looked at her. You thought he was rich, I corrected. There is a difference. You liked him because he bought you expensive gifts and flattered your ego. You didn't care where the money came from as long as the champagne kept flowing. My father stepped forward, wringing his hands. Audrey, please. This is serious. We heard what the lawyer said. Those men, the lenders, they are dangerous. If Brittany is tied to that debt, she could be in real physical danger. You cannot let that happen. She is your sister. I looked at this man who had stood by silently while I was berated for years. Now suddenly, he had found his voice when his golden child was threatened. I am not letting anything happen, Dad, I said calmly. She let it happen. She chose to sleep with a married man. She chose to spend money that wasn't hers. She chose to sign her name next to his. She is an adult. Adults pay their debts. Patricia began to cry real ugly tears this time. But she has no money, Audrey. She has nothing. You have to help her. You can pay off the loan. It is nothing to you. Just pay it off and we will make sure she never bothers you again. We will move away. Just save her, please. I stared at them, marveling at the sheer audacity. After everything, the betrayal, the gaslighting, the humiliation, they still believed I existed solely to clean up their messes. They still thought my purpose was to be the safety net for the people who pushed me off the ledge. No, I said. The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Patricia stopped crying. She looked at me with shock. No, you would let your sister be hurt. I leaned in close so she wouldn't miss a single syllable. You told me to be generous, Mother. You told me to share. Well, I shared the reality of my marriage with her. I warned you all. I told you Grant was a liar. I told you he was using us. You didn't listen because you preferred the lie. You chose him over me. You chose her over me. I straightened up and signaled to the doorman to open the main doors. You wanted to bet on Grant. You lost, and now the bill has come due. That is the price of betrayal. I walked through the glass doors into the cool gray afternoon. Behind me, I heard my mother screaming my name, shouting that I was unnatural, that I was cruel. I didn't slow down. I walked to my car where my driver was waiting. Get in, I told Ms. Parker. As the car pulled away, I looked out the tinted window. My parents were standing on the sidewalk, looking small and helpless against the backdrop of the city I owned. I picked up my phone. I went to my contacts. I selected Dad. Block contact. I selected Home. Block contact. I dropped the phone into my bag. The bridge wasn't just burned. I had nuked the foundations. And as we merged onto the highway, I realized that for the first time in my life, I wasn't driving away from home. I was finally driving toward it. The Seattle rain had finally stopped leaving the city scrubbed clean and glistening under a rare, crisp blue sky. 6 months is a long time in the world of business, but it is a lifetime when you are rebuilding your soul. I stood on the pavement of the up-and-coming South Lake Union District, looking up at the facade of a building that hadn't existed in my imagination half a year ago. The structure was a marvel of sustainable timber and smart glass rising 4 stories into the air. Above the entrance, the steel letters caught the morning light Phoenix architecture and design. It was not subtle symbolism. We had burned the old world down, and this was what rose from the ash. Damon stood beside me. He was not wearing the stiff suits he used to wear at Lux Living. He was dressed in a black cashmere sweater and dark denim, looking less like a corporate drone, and more like the visionary artist he always was. There was no hand-holding. There were no longing glances. We did not need romance to complicate the perfect symmetry of our partnership. He was the creative engine, and I was the strategic fuel. We were 50-50 partners in the truest sense, bound by a contract of mutual respect rather than a marriage license. The ribbon cutting is in 20 minutes, Damon said, checking his watch. The mayor is already inside. Are you ready to introduce the new era? I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of wet concrete and possibility. I am ready, I said. We are going to change the skyline, Damon, and this time we own every single rivet. My phone buzzed in my clutch. It was a single vibration, the specific pattern I had set for the private investigator I had retained to close out the final loose ends of the divorce. I hesitated for a moment, then pulled the device out. There was no text, just a photograph attached to a location tag in a grimy industrial suburb 20 miles south of the city. I enlarged the image. It was taken through the window of a run-down 24-hour diner. In the grain of the digital zoom, I saw a man in a stained white apron wiping down a greasy table. His hair was thinning and he looked 10 years older. It was Grant. He wasn't the CEO anymore. He was the busboy working for minimum wage plus tips, every cent of which was likely garnished by the creditors he owed. In the background of the photo behind the counter, a woman with dull, unwashed hair was pouring coffee for a truck driver. She looked exhausted, her face devoid of the makeup and arrogance that had defined her. Brittany. They were still together not out of love, but out of necessity, bound by the shared shackle of a debt they could never outrun. They were living the life they could afford. I looked at the picture for exactly 5 seconds. I expected to feel a surge of triumph or perhaps a twinge of pity, but I felt nothing. It was like looking at a photo of strangers. They were just ghosts, two people who had once occupied space in my life but had been evicted to make room for better things. I pressed the side button on my phone, turning the screen black. I dropped the device back into my bag. "Is everything all right?" Damon asked, noticing the pause. I looked up at the Phoenix sign, and then at the glass doors where my new staff, my loyal team, was waiting. "Everything is perfect," I replied. I adjusted my blazer and stepped forward. The automatic doors slid open with a welcoming hiss. I didn't look back at the street. I didn't look back at the past. I walked into the lobby of my own making, ready to build something that would last forever. The view from the top was going to be spectacular. The story of Audrey, Grant, and Brittany is more than just a tale of betrayal. It is a masterclass in the difference between perceived value and actual ownership. The most critical lesson we can draw from this saga is that true power lies in the fine print. Grant and Brittany operated under the delusion that access to a lifestyle was the same as owning it. They were passengers in a vehicle they didn't know how to drive, let alone repair. They failed because they relied on charm and manipulation, assets that depreciate quickly, while Audrey relied on intellectual property, legal structures, and financial literacy, assets that compound over time. Furthermore, this story serves as a brutal reminder that ignorance is a liability. Grant's downfall wasn't just caused by his infidelity, it was caused by his arrogance. He signed contracts he didn't read, claimed assets he didn't understand, and fought a war against a woman whose arsenal he hadn't bothered to inspect. He proved that in business and in life, the person who prepares for the worst usually ends up living the best. Finally, Audrey teaches us the transformative power of boundaries. For years, she was the scapegoat, tolerating her family's disrespect to keep the peace. Her ultimate victory came not when she destroyed Grant, but when she stopped seeking validation from people who were committed to misunderstanding her. She showed that the highest form of self-respect is knowing when to cut your losses, whether that means a toxic marriage, a parasitic sister, or enabling parents. The best revenge isn't making them suffer, it's flourishing without them. If you enjoyed seeing justice served cold, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of resilience. Let me know in the comments. Did Audrey go too far by cutting off her parents, or was it the only way to truly be free?